My name's Rusty Price. I am the founder and lead. I'm not sure if I'm the leader, but I am the founder of an organization called Camino. And within Camino, we have both a church that's bilingual, multicultural, and then we have a nonprofit that does wraparound services. We focus on the Latino immigrant, but we're bilingual, so we serve everybody. And we've seen incredible growth over the last few years, but love serving people in the name of Christ, and not just want to be the mouth of Christ, but the hands and feet of Jesus as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't you take us back to the beginning? Because I'll give you guys just an outsider's point of view on what God has done. It's unbelievable. I mean, you walk on this campus, and here we are 20 years later, and I mean, there's a health services element to what you guys are doing, a thrift store, economic development stuff. You got mental health counseling. You've got a research center that's doing all this. We're going to dig into all of this stuff. You're doing dental services, like all of these different things, but it's also a church and an urban church planting center and these different types of things. Take us back to the beginning though, Rusty. Did you know that this is where you were going when you got into this 20 years ago? I mean, did you have this vision of this enormous, work that is doing all this stuff, combining the church work with nonprofit work and community engagement principles? Like, what was the instinct at the beginning?
Yeah, no. So to know a little bit about me, my father was a pastor, grandfather pastor, 5 uncles pastors. I was born in the in the ministry, and but we were this radical fundamentalist separatist group of people who really valued preciseness when it came to theology and doctrine, and then a separation from the world with the way we dress and the things we did. And so I grew up with this idea of evangelism was leaving my safe place into a dangerous world and try to convince someone to come back with me. And then we felt called to go to Cuba as missionaries. And that's where I always say, I think I met God in Cuba. And I saw this, it just completely changed my paradigm of who God was, and that he loves his creation. And so because I think I grew up with this one side of the gospel, right? The eternal, but nothing about the present. And anything I would have ever done in the past, in the present, was nothing more than a gimmick to try to get somebody to come so I could share the gospel. But we felt called to a place, Cuba, and lots of crazy stories, and that's why we started the nonprofit that is not faith-based. Cuba wouldn't work with a religious organization. We say it's faith-filled, but it's not faith-based. And it was very pragmatic, kind of strategic. And now, all these years later, I find that God didn't really call me to a place. He didn't call me to a people. He called me to a person. It's himself. And so journeying with him and following him, I see the same Jesus that I see in the Gospels. That's very present, very real. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and he loves the people around him. And I think it's been a cool journey for us, for me, to come from where I was to where we are today,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, why don't you give us just real quick, off the top of your head,
Yeah.
and you can see if you can even remember all these
Yeah.
things. What's kind of the scope of services that you guys offer in the community? So we started at the beginning kind of with that instinct to think holistically about your neighbors, not just getting them to come to church, but to think holistically about them. Fast forward 20 years now, when you go on the campus of Camino and all the different things that you guys have going on, try and list off all the things that you guys have. Sure. And I need you guys to take a deep breath, because you're about to get a fire hydrant full of stuff.
Yeah. So we have a health center that's integrated health with primary care, chronic care, but also behavioral health with psychiatrists, psychologists. We also have within that a program called Camino Vida, which is lifestyle, exercise, nutritionist, food security, everything that has to do with the physical health is there. We have another program called Ariba, which is education employment entrepreneurship. So we do training around workforce development, English as a second language, a lot of the specific things for the community we need. But over the last 6 months, we've been able to help place over 700 people in jobs, which is fundamental if they're going to have any kind of success, right? Continued success. And we've helped train, strategize, and find capital for, I think, 56 small businesses to be started. So we talk about, we work with, our mission is to equip people to live healthy, hopeful, productive lives. And so within the healthy, we have the health services, the productive, we have these entrepreneurial workforce development, job placement. And then we have the church, which is the spiritual, the hope. And we have Camino University, where we are training a very specific certificate in urban church planting through doing this type of social work in neighborhoods. We have a research institute, which has been very powerful for us. All of our programs are data-driven, data-informed. We have a thrift store, which is super cool. It voted the #1 thrift store in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah, we've worked recently. We have a person called social navigation, or a role social navigation. I think we got 7 of these guys. And so what they do is they guide a family. We assess the family where they are, identify their needs, and we connect them to all the services we have internally. But then if we don't have that service internally, we'll connect it externally. So we say we aren't here to provide services. We're here to serve people. And by serving the person, many of our services have grown out of this realization that, hey, we're helping them with this, but they also need that. And scope, we have about 110 employees, full-time employees, and a few locations, and serving a ton of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the whole idea here, right, is like, it's easy for folks who are either live with us right now or are going to be joining us in the future to be like, well, that's great for you, Rusty.
Yeah.
How do we, it's overwhelming, right?
That is.
One of the things that you and I connected on so much when we were wandering around is your belief that you were never called to save your community on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not this hero mindset. I'd love for you to kind of take us back to the journey that God took you on as you started to realize that it wasn't just one dynamic leader that was going to impact the community. I mean, I met doctors and lawyers and research experts and, dentists and, business owners. And just as I was walking around your campus and seeing all this stuff, and there's a really fundamental part of your leadership that has taken this way beyond anything that you could have done on your own. So explain to us where that came from, both your theological motivation and just your leadership style that's released so much in your community.
Well, I think it comes with a very healthy opinion of how insufficient I am. It's like I always jokingly say, and it may not be a joke, but it's a good thing I'm the founder, because if I tried to get hired right now at Camino, I wouldn't qualify. So I think another thing that I came to realize, that this vision is not my vision. This vision is God's vision, and he just allowed me to kind of be the first one in this place to see it. And so I can't see vision without seeing it through the people that God sends. And I'm convinced that God has equipped and called people. And so for me, in my leadership style, it's, in fact, whenever we hire a new person, I always ask them, what's your dream? Because I want to hear what God's put in their heart. And then we try to figure out how we can empower, equip, and build that out, let that flourish, create this ecosystem that's not so boxy, right? That we can stick, that they can flourish, and then it comes together, and it's very powerful when it's not, this isn't personality driven. It's most of the services we have started as a dream in the heart of a Latino immigrant. And I love that. And it was their passion, their impetus. And I could use my social capital, connecting people, but really it's it's impressive how when we all get together, it's kind of like stained glass, right? Bunch of different
Yeah.
views and colors and things, but you put it all together, and through that stained glass, you really see Jesus. Where if it's just me, they might just see me, and who wants to see that?
Right. Right. Yeah. So tell me about, or, tell everybody that's joining us about maybe like a specific story of somebody who came in that was highly gifted in an area that you could have never pulled off on your own, and then how that's progressed over the years.
Yeah, one recent one it was that 15 years ago, there was a couple that came from Venezuela, fleeing Venezuela. The government had seized all their assets. They were both dentists, and they came with just a few dollars in their pocket. Ended up coming to Camino. We just loved on them, helped them. I mean, as I look back, I don't really remember doing anything significant to help them, but just listening to them and encouraging them. And I think we gave them a little bit of money, but they came to faith, which was awesome, right? They saw Christ, and they accepted Christ as their Savior. Well, now they were both dentists, but coming from Venezuela, that means nothing. They had, now 15 years later, I got a call from Fernando, who's the man, at the end of last year, saying, "Hey, Rusty, you always dreamed about doing dental. I think I can help. I'm now the director of the International Dental Program at Chapel Hill." All those years ago, and now helping a little bit there, he's teed us up to help thousands of people with something that is very difficult. And that's one of those beautiful stories. And I got thousands. I mean, another lady, single mom from Venezuela. It was coincidence. They're not all Venezuelan, but she'd come and she didn't have a place to stay. She lived with us for a little while, and she ended up starting a program to feed homeless people. And you're familiar with TED Talks? Mm-hmm. NPR did a program of her story, and then TED Talks picked it up and did an article of the 10 most interesting people you'll never meet, and she was number one. It was a beautiful story here. This single Venezuelan undocumented lady using her resources to serve the homeless, and there was a gentleman that was a U.S. vet that was depressed and on the streets, and because of that, he's doing great now. Continues to volunteer here, and so for me, it's beautiful to create this ecosystem where people can come, like a Yalitza, like a Fernando, and they can give their talents and gifts and help their community. But it's not, it really hasn't been me sitting down in a back room strategizing. It's been more leading by following.
Yeah. And I think that's an important instinct that I've seen all over the country in different parts of the world. It's why we started doing this, is to get more stories like this out there. Anybody that I have met along the way that is doing some sort of holistic engagement in their community has this instinct inside of them that says, I can't do it all, but what I can do is I can bring some things to the table and then create an atmosphere where folks who have ideas can help that. So I guess one of my questions for you would be, what kind of, go to the earlier days, what was some of the things that you were bringing to the table that was able to set the tone for people to, like, what resources were you bringing to the table? I'm guessing you didn't have millions of dollars just stacked up real high, right? No. So what was that instinct that you were able to, what were you bringing to the table that allowed people to come in and thrive in their area of passion?
I again, my wife and I, we're not that smart. We've never been wealthy. Well, one thing we have done is had a radical faith to obey God. And so in our context, we sold everything we had. We were homeless, and we poured everything in. And so I think what we gave was maybe an example of that you can trust God and you can obey him because he will never fail. And through the years, we've seen, we've stepped into that impossible, which is so hard to do. Faith and stupidity look exactly alike until God steps in. It's like nobody gets it. And I think if there's one contribution, it's been that, just a tenacious commitment to say, God, we're going to follow you. We're going to trust you for daily bread. And daily bread, who wants daily bread? I want monthly bread or an annual resource of bread, but I think by having, first of all, by leaving my comfort zone, I get to a group of people that are living that way, maybe not by choice, right? And so putting that together was powerful. And then helping, social capital is huge, right?
Yeah.
My father was a pastor of a large church, and being able to bridge people who may not have that social capital, and then telling their stories and empowering them. Maybe those two things is the big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's really important for people to hear too, is that oftentimes what pastors or ministry leaders or organizational leaders can bring to the table isn't being an expert in like opening a dental clinic, but it's opening up relationships with other people that can help get that dental clinic opened, or, sharing what Rusty just referred to as social capital is something that is actually really important. We all have gifts, we all have talents, we all bring something to the table. And for us to make an impact in our communities, we're going to need to learn the instinct of learning to reach out to others for us to share the different types of capital that we have. One of the questions that I have for you, Rusty, is how have you identified what the needs are? So you focus on a very specific community, but you said you'll kind of work with anybody. But how have you identified what the needs are? Because you just said something that I thought was really interesting. You said, I don't just sit around thinking up our next big thing. You're kind of waiting for people to come with vision. You're waiting for people to come with giftedness or whatever that may be. How are you guys identifying what the needs are in your community and then choosing what you're going to do to address those needs?
Yeah. When I started, it was I'm living in the community. I mean, I'm there in their homes every day, eating with them. So it was observed, and I listened, and it was very obvious. So it wasn't reading a book somewhere. It was being on the ground. Now we have a research institute which also do community-based research. So we get empirical data of what the community is saying is their need, which really has helped us greatly with funding and being able to get other people on board, because it's not me coming and telling a story. There's data, but it started with looking at it and listening and just building trust and getting them to trust me enough to tell me what they really need.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, let's start here. Why did you start a research institute alongside the work? And then I've got some follow-up questions, but let's talk about this, because I really do believe that as we are practitioners that are going to continue moving towards holistic care in our community, research should play a huge part in this. Why did you guys start the Research Institute? And then I'll follow up.
Well, research is the language that will influence systems. Stories will move hearts, but research and data will change systems. And we had a lady who was doing her doctorate at the university here, and she did her dissertation here. And I just knew I wanted to hire her on my team. And it was actually her. She said, we need to start a research institute. So we did, and it has been incredibly powerful. So we now have, we get our own IRBs. We don't partner with universities. We do it on our own. And yeah, that's, I agree with you. I mean, research, we have to learn to speak the language of systems if we're going to make significant change.
So dig into that a little bit more. I just wrote that down in the chat and taking notes in the chat for you guys. One of the best quotes is, faith and stupidity look an awful lot alike until God steps in. So
yeah,
a walking tweet. Steve, thank you. But research is the language that moves systems. Stories will move hearts. Research will change the system. Can you give us a practical example of not just getting people inspired to move towards something, but actually the research moving towards changing something in the system?
And I think this is one of these things where we have to learn and cross barriers, right? Because in a church world, we're storytellers. And like you said, we want to move hearts and inspire, and that way people will get involved. But if we're going to deal with local governments or corporations, foundations, they are going to ask for empirical data. And it's been a learning curve for me, because I love to tell stories. I love to get people emotionally connected. But I would find that I would talk to people who sit in high-powered positions in companies, and they would get emotionally connected and they say, hey, I'll help you personally, but I have nothing I can show and give that will have a corporate group make a decision to get involved. Mm-hmm. So it really has been the difference of our capacity to expand pre Research Institute and post. It's night and day. Yeah, night and day.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit more, because I think this is really important. This is so far outside the box. Guys, please remember, this is Pastor Rusty Price, right? Son of a pastor, missionary to, where'd you say, Cuba?
Cuba.
Yeah, missionary to Cuba. This is not somebody who specialized in this stuff. This is somebody who has a heart for ministry that was able to develop this instinct. Talk to us a little bit more about, you just talked about how research, before you started doing research and after you started doing research. Talk about how that's impacted funding for your ministry.
The dental story, right? So we just finished a project of community needs and strength assessment, and it kind of simultaneous when I get the call from this guy Fernando, who said, hey, I can help. The research showed that the number one need that the community said they had was dental. It wasn't food security. It wasn't. And so with that data, we took that data, we did a proposal to the local county, and the county granted us $4.7 million to start this as seed money to start the dental program, where I could have gone and I could have taken pictures, I could have told stories, I could have taken a little kid there that were missing teeth, and they would have cried with me. But because there's empirical data, they were able to give us funding that now is going to change the lives of thousands of people. But right. Without the data, that wouldn't have happened. We would have either had to investigate and cited data, but now that we have that capacity within ourselves, it really changes things for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Go back to the, how did you guys start a research institute?
We had participated with research with other universities, and they were interested in the population we serve. And then I was talking to the lady, Dr. Carrie Brevins, who's on our staff. She was hired and she was doing some grant writing and things like that. But she's a researcher. And I talked to her and I said, what's your dream? She said, I would love to have a research institute. And I'm like, dale, let's do it. Let's do that. So we immediately we hired a social anthropologist, and now it's a team of 5. We went after, I learned this at IRB is like the accreditation for the research. Typically, people want to do research, they'll go together with a university. But if you do that, the university owns the research. You're just a contributor. And so we chased our very first certification for a study, and we got it. And once we got it, then we've become a legitimate research institute. And now we have groups reaching out to us. Mm-hmm. And so now we're in the seat of where a university would be. Mm-hmm. And again, it has been extremely powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. How many people do you guys have on your research team now?
We have a total of 7 on the research team, and that's growing rapidly. And we're looking to do like market research, all types of other research as well, which it becomes sustainable because that is a very needed, sellable service. Yeah. So sustainability is another thing we're always looking at. Fundraising's fun, but sustainability is the key.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Okay, so what are some of the things that maybe are top of mind that you'd be able to share with us? Is there anything that is not quite there yet that you guys are considering right now that you'd be able to share, like things that you're starting to see, something's bubbling up and you're considering going after it?
2 big things we're looking at right now is the whole thought of affordable housing. We're looking at doing some container homes and working to help people to home ownership, because to me, I get disappointed with the affordable housing system that I've seen. It seems like a spin cycle for poverty, never with a path to home ownership. So we're working heavily in that area. We're also talking about a credit union. We've got pretty far down the line with that, because the constituents that we serve, the community we serve, have a hard time or barriers with banking. And so I believe with those two things, it will pretty much close the loop with anything except for maybe transportation. And I don't even know how to deal with that one. That's beyond our pay grade. But we have done some limited things with housing on like one-offs, but we're working on a program for that now. And then hopefully the credit union.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you explain to folks, if they don't know what container homes are, can you explain to them what that is?
Yeah, so they're taking these shipping containers, which we used to use all the time when we were shipping supplies to Cuba, and they'll take these metal shipping containers and turn them into really neat homes. And you can put 2 together, 4 together, and it's an economic, quick way to build a very sturdy home. And it's not near as expensive as like custom home building.
Yeah. Rusty, talk to me about some of the theological motivation for your work. Like what are some of the roots that have moved you outside of just doing traditional church work? What is like scripture? Like what is the heart of God that got you to move towards thinking outside the box?
One big one, Hebrews 13, where it challenges us to go outside the camp with Christ and suffer the shame. One of our values is we cross borders, and it comes from that. And where I came from, it was such a, you've got to protect your testimony above everything. You have to be, people have to see the difference. And so we were so segregated from the world. It be in the world, but not of the world, that verse. Mm-hmm. Well, we were definitely not of the world, but we were not in the world.
Right.
And so for me, I think darkness or light has never been afraid of darkness. Mm-hmm. And so the theology behind, we have to be in the world, we have to penetrate a dark world with light and love, has really shaped even our structure, because our nonprofit is not religious. And so one of the guys on my research institute is a Marxist atheist. And we have multiple people who are not people of faith. But what happens is the proximity to faith is making a lasting and hopefully everlasting impact on these people. And I think that willingness to collaborate and even hire people again, from the nonprofit. On the church side, it's different, right? I think the church side, we have a creed. People need to believe like us and live like us. But being able to create this separate organization that is where we're collaborators for the community has been a very powerful thing that came out of this theological challenge for me, challenging me to get out of my comfort zone, make myself of no reputation, mm-hmm. and to be willing to suffer shame. And I always believed that the shame that I'll suffer will not be from the people outside the camp, but it'll be from the people inside the camp. Mm-hmm. It'll be more from the church than it will be the community. Yeah. And I'm okay with that as long as Jesus is there with what we're doing.
Yeah. Here's a question for you that I definitely did not tee up for you, but you teed it up for yourself. So hopefully you have an answer. What have you learned from working in a predominantly faith-centered organization? What have you learned as you've observed and done life with folks who don't come from your same faith background? What have you learned by working that closely in work that is deeply motivated by your faith? Yeah. What have you learned from the non-believers in your Christian faith? What have you learned from working so closely with folks that come from a different background like that?
Wow. Yeah, I would say I'm inspired by a lot of the non-believers that I've employed. I'm inspired by their passionate pursuit of excellence, where I feel like sometimes in a church world we're very empathetic and emotional, driven by those things. But I think sometimes in a church context we lose some of the efficiencies, right? And I've been very impressed with some of the folks that are coming from more of a secular mindset, and their call to efficiency, excellency, professionalism. I've also been challenged by paradigms of thinking that I care more than they care. You know, it's
Wow.
like it's like that's not necessarily true. It's not that some of these people care just as much as I could ever care.
Mhm.
Um, I think what they're missing is they only care for the life here. And I always like to say, if I just serve people's physical needs, it's kind of like hospice for eternity, right? It's hospice.
Wow.
We've got to share the gospel. It's not just about those needs. Um, One thing I've learned working with them too is if I will honor them and they can truly see that how much I honor them and respect them, and
Mhm.
then it sure gives me platform that the honor becomes mutual, and it gives me a better platform to be able to share my faith.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful, man. I just wrote that down. Hospice for eternity, man. If we started to think like that, that would truly change our, the way that we engage in our
Mhm.
communities. 'Cause, I mean, um, yeah, that one really hit me. Uh, how many people are in your church, Rusty? This isn't a flex. I just want people to see.
Yeah, we're low days we're around 400, high days we're around 500.
Okay, so the reason I
450,
asked that,
500.
we don't do that as a competition. I just
Yeah.
want you to see that this isn't some 20,000 person mega church
Mm.
that is doing all of this stuff. This is the way that the kingdom of God, in my opinion, when rightly ordered, um, releases the giftedness of the body to do the work, right? So you don't have an unlimited budget.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have many of the
Well,
struggles of folks that are on the call right now or are going to be joining us in the future. I'm sure the church, isn't just, swimming in gold coins for fun. This is a ministry that God has called you to. You guys are faithful shepherds to 400 or 500 people. Um, and it doesn't mean that you have to be a mega church to make a huge impact in your community.
I would even say, David, that like our offering Sunday, I think was $3,800.
Mm,
So to give some context, I would even say it's harder for a mega church to do what we're doing because it's what we do is not cost marketing.
mhm,
What we do is the essence of who we are.
right.
And so one of the things I'm passionate about is now our church can exist without ever taking an offering
Mhm,
because we've been able to, through other funding sources, cover all the expenses of the whole organization, and it's de-stressed. From a pastor's perspective, I never come and preach on Sunday for lunch. I'm not preaching for the light bill. I
right.
don't think about finance when I'm addressing the congregation. And that has really kind of given this altruistic atmosphere in church. And I love helping smaller churches and marginalized community churches, which struggle a lot of times with sustainability.
Right.
Try to find ways that they can turn their facility or the ministry they already do into a source of sustainability.
Mhm. Yeah, that leads us directly into a question from Russell. He says, what type of community is ripe? I think he's looking for kind of an instinct, right? Like what type of community is ripe for replicating the kind of work that Camino is doing? Um, and for those that don't fit the profile of exactly what you guys are doing, what are the largest lessons that they can apply if they want to move into this type of, maybe what are some early steps that a pastor, organization leader could do to start moving into this type of stuff?
Right. So we're in an urban setting where there's a lot of talk around marginalized community. And I think the atmosphere of the community in which we serve lends itself to, or at least opens doors for us to be able to go and talk about what we do.
Right.
I think in more rural settings, it may be a little more difficult to replicate what we do. But I think the principles underneath it of being salt and light in our community will open doors in just about any community
Mhm.
for other sustainable financial sources coming in for the work. And that was one of the big things for me to look at it inversely from, hey, I'm not going to try to get money from the congregation to do this work. If God's calling us, he'll provide. Let me step out by faith. And then seeing God, it's like we're plundering Egypt to go on this journey. And I believe there's opportunities like that everywhere, but identifying the need that's present, saying we're going to step out and help that need. And we don't march with placards and crosses and, hey, you need to get baptized before I'm going to help you. It's very much we're serving you. And then through that service, it gives us opportunity to share the gospel. But yeah, I think we're urban. We serve in a very specific minority group, which is Hispanic. And in our part of the world, that is a huge deal. It's a new community, which has created challenges for the community. And that's kind of where God's placed us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Jim asked the question, and I've got to follow up on this one. What percentage of the church is involved in the work or receiving services? And then my freestyle on top of that question is like, with a church that is doing so much in the community through these different organizations, has it demotivated people? Like, oh, they've got it taken care of it, or has it motivated people and given them areas to get into? So Jim's question, what percentage of the church is involved in the work and or receiving services? And then kind of going off what I just said.
So from a church perspective, the last 2 months, and I was out of town for a lot of it, we grew by about 100 people.
Wow.
Because we've had this influx of migrants coming from the border. I'm super proud of the team. 260, we serviced 260 immigrants from the border within the last 30 days. Now they're all in permanent housing, working, sustainable. I'm blown away with what they did. And because of that, about 100 of them are engaged in the church. Wow. And we were able to connect families in the church that housed families. So they're very engaged. It's not 100%, but I would guess probably at least 50% of the congregation are engaged in significant ways. As far as receiving the services, it's probably less because a lot of the families in the church don't need the services now. So they've grown out of needing our services, but we do make it very readily available. We try to create this image of this is us. This is who we are, what we do. So yeah, that's.
So I had a very personal, visceral reaction to the work. We were touring the campus last month. Actually, our guest next week is Gary Gunderson, who is an expert in connecting faith communities to healthcare. That is going to be a massively important conversation of how we can engage the community with the health of our community. So we are touring with Gary, your property, right? We were over in the kind of the holistic health area. You've got the gym area. You've got a full-on commercial grade kitchen. Just real quick, tell them why you have a commercial grade kitchen. How do you use that?
Yeah, we have nutritionists, and so we do teaching and on healthy cooking. We have a food pantry we call our food pharmacy, and what we were finding is we're giving out all this terrible food, which is going against the health, and so we kind of swat that around and want to we look at food as medicine, and so we try to put it on digital platforms so it's accessible to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want you guys to hear this, because lots and lots and lots of churches, lots of organizations have commercial grade kitchens. It's just Rusty and his team are using that to teach people how to do healthy meals and how the whole idea, sustainable health holistically for their community. So we're touring that property. We're walking around, and then probably 8 or 10 people show up. Rusty is fluent in Spanish, begins immediately speaking to this group of people. I have no idea what's going on. We just keep on doing the tour. And I was like, Rusty, what just happened? He said, oh, that was a group of folks that I think they had just arrived in America, Rusty.
Yeah.
And what was that moment? And then where were you pointing them to? That was unbelievable. I mean, I know the answer to this, but I want you to share that with everybody. How were you able to help an immigrant family immediately on your campus and point to where they needed to go?
Well, and I need to just go ahead and full disclosure. I am freaking in love with Latino immigrants. So, I mean, that's like
Yeah.
my happy place. But we have families like that show up every day, and we connect them to, we call them social navigators, but they're like a guide, and they'll do an assessment of what they need. And then before leaving, they're going to have food, clothes, if they need the health care right then. And that produces a lot of hope, and it builds a relationship. And then we're charting and following it on. But yeah. So it's cool to have a group of guys and ladies that immediately I can say, hey, sit and talk with these guys. They got you. They're going to help you.
And this is my vision. This is my preferred vision for a hopeful future. Walter Brueggemann calls it prophetic imagination. Is I would love to see the body of Christ, and this is a super aspirational idea. I would love to see every church and every community have social navigators that know the system, that know where resources are, even if they're not on campus like Rusty has. I would love for churches to have such an understanding of what is available in their community that people begin to trust the church. These folks literally get dropped off on Rusty's campus because they know that if they get dropped off there, they're going to be able to find the resources that they need. And man, in the name of Jesus, let that be for our communities around the country, right? But we got to start thinking differently. We have to start thinking more innovatively and outside the box. We're not just trying to get butts in the seats on Sunday mornings. We're trying to embody the presence of Jesus in our communities. And so, Rusty, you have a statement that I know that you will go to the mat for. You think that the Latino community is here to save the world. Can you explain
Yeah.
this to us, and just tell us why you believe this is true?
Yeah, I say all the time, I think God's sending the Latino immigrant to save the U.S. because their value base is they're people of faith. 4 out of 5 Latinos come from a Christian worldview, which it gives this commonality to morality of right and wrong, but love their families. They are so committed to family. And they have a work ethic that's just incredible, and value education. The other thing is they are here to sacrifice building something for the future. And they're aspirational, they're resilient. And as I look at this community, it reminds me of what my grandparents talked about, where they're neighbors, they help each other, real sense of community. And I think our country needs a lot of that. And I love serving this group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me, if, let's say that a church wanted to dip their toes into really getting into, be a part of the conversation in their community about asylum seekers or immigrant families that are coming. We've got a lot of stuff in the news about people just being dropped off in communities. If they wanted to take the earliest steps of that, what would be some 1, 2, 3 kind of 101 level steps to start getting involved?
So the understanding the people who are coming right now is historically people have come because they have family here. Mm-hmm. If they're legal or illegal, they're coming. They have network. The ones that are coming here are refugees fleeing terrible situations, and many of them don't know anybody, and they come with no money, nothing in their pocket, right? So, they need shelter, they need food, they need encouragement, they need guidance. I think what we're seeing, a lot of churches in this area are donating, used furniture, beds, food, those kind of things. It really is a humanitarian crisis. We went to the border expecting to see a security crisis, and the humanitarian crisis was so huge you couldn't see the security crisis. So I would say if we can help what's the what I'm trying to say, not criminalize the folks that are coming. I think that the paradigm shift, the ones that are coming now come here, they're given permission to be here while they're waiting on a final determination, right? So I think just that concept would help a ton, help say, hey, let's give these guys a chance. Housing is huge. Language barrier is a big deal, but praise God for Google Translate.
I think that's actually one of my I think that every pastor or ministry leader, organizational leader should have some sort of translation device on their phone, because you can literally speak into it and then hand it to somebody and you can have a conversation. It's a little bit choppy, but
Sure.
you can actually, work your way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
David, I would
yeah,
say, David, it's not, I don't have like a step 1, 2, 3, but would be more than willing, to leave my contact information. And if there's ways we can get out, deeper information or connect people to the services here, whatever we have, we'll give away. I mean, love to share with what we're doing, what we've learned.
absolutely. So what is the best contact for somebody to reach out if they want to learn more?
Yeah. If you email me, rusty@camino.org, I will copy somebody else on my team and say, hey, thanks, and get involved with, these conversations. So rusty@camino.org would be more than happy to help connect and navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. If there's any other questions on the call, please go ahead and drop those. We've got just a few minutes left here. We've talked a lot in this network over the last 2.5 months. We've had some great conversations. A theme has been that every church, we're trying to encourage every church to consider having a separate nonprofit from their church for their community engagement strategy. Obviously, you agree with that, but could you tell us why? Why do you believe that you need a separate nonprofit? And you actually have multiple. So if you could explain that, why is that important?
As we look ahead, I continually see that things have changed with culture. So, my grandparents' generation, you had all these tithing members. And so sustainability is a challenge now for churches with offerings. And I think being able to start a nonprofit, you have more funding opportunities in order to empower ministry. Because I think offerings, in some cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, you won't have surplus funding to do that. The other thing is, the nonprofit allows people to engage with us that they wouldn't engage with our church. Right. It's both government entities, corporate entities. We check all the boxes, and so we don't put up. We're not hard for them to fund. Mm-hmm. And if it was just a church, they would, even if we had the research, they'd say, we'd love to help you, but I'm not sure we can jump through those hoops. Mm-hmm. So it really does open up a whole new world of opportunity for that. The other for me is this: I create an intersection by hiring people who are not of faith. Mm-hmm. And I can do that in a nonprofit setting without personally, without lowering my, or violating my convictions of what church is supposed to be and leadership of church. And it gives me proximity to be able to live the gospel and share the gospel on a regular basis to people.
So what are the different nonprofits you have? And then this is a little bit geeky IRS type stuff. Mm-hmm. What are the different nonprofits you have? And then what are their purposes? Because you have a ton of stuff underneath each one.
Yeah.
So
we have 3 nonprofits. One is, they're all 501c3, but within the bylaws, and the bylaws will define their purpose and use. 2 would be considered faith-based. 1 is not faith-based. The one that's not faith-based is where we get almost all the funding, not 100%, but the vast majority. The management one owns properties. And so then there's rental agreements, and that helps us leverage our properties to turn the real estate asset into funding. Again, geeky, right? But I could justify paying rent from grants. It's a justifiable expense. And then those monies are, in a sense, liberated, and it becomes discretionary money that we can use on. It's not designated after that. Right. Then we have the church in its own entity that, again, to protect the integrity of what church does, what the purpose of the church is, but the church benefits from those other entities. And And so for us, it's kind of this triangle,
Yeah.
this trinity of organizations that all work together, carry commonality in name, different bylaws, different budgets, some separation of board, which is important. The other thing I would say, accounting and reporting. If you're going to begin to go after money and grants, you be prepared for the accounting and the reporting. It's heavy, but if you do it right, it'll release resources to do a whole lot more than you can do with just raising money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is solid gold, man. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to say some final comments here. If you want to be thinking about this, I always like to ask our guests to have just like a final exhortation for folks, both who are watching now and who will listen or watch in the weeks and months to come. Just some final exhortation from you to encourage folks who are maybe at the beginning of this journey or on the journey in the same way that you are. Next week, we have Gary Gunderson, Portia Jones, and Dr. Rachel Zimmer talking about healthcare and the connection that between healthcare and faith communities. It's going to be a phenomenal conversation. I hope you guys can join us next week. And then also tell your friends about it. We're continuing to have these conversations every Thursday at 1 o'clock. Rusty, you want to go ahead and give us an exhortation as we get ready to go?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, most powerful challenges for me always is to always continually step into the impossible. Everything within me wants security, wants, to be able to control. And I think in the past, sometimes I've committed the sin of trying to work up to my capacity to serve God with my capacity. And my calling's way beyond my capacity. And until I step out there into the impossible, I'm not going to see God move like he wants to. And just lean into the faith. You can live by faith because God is faithful. He will never fail, and being willing to take those risks. And it does feel stupid. And if it wasn't God, maybe it was stupid. And then you got to be willing to say, whoops, that was me. That wasn't God. But to this point, I mean, God has never failed. So, making sure the calling and then running after it boldly.
Yeah,
that's what I'd say.
That's so good. Well, praise God for that. And Rusty, thank you for the work that you're doing, for the example that you are to so many. I do pray that these are like seeds that take root, and in the days and weeks and years to come, that they'll grow up into something beautiful that provides shade for our neighbors. And just thank you so much. And thank you for joining us this week on the Neighborliness Network.
Thank you for the opportunity. Blessings.